Welcome to Meet Yourself, where we learn what work, life, and relationships can teach us about ourselves and each other. Today's guest is Norman Tran, a learning experience designer who recently found Relating Between the Lines, an online school for relational education. After running the company as CEO for 3 years, he ultimately stepped down in order to pursue a better fit role within his company, a move that required extreme emotional resilience, self awareness, and ruthless authenticity. We all know that it takes grit to become successful, but what if you define success ultimately in a way that's not aligned with who you really are? How do you know when to grit and when to quit? I'll let Norman tell his story. All right. So, hi, Norman. Welcome. Why don't you start off by just telling us a bit about yourself, what you're working on, and what you do?
Yeah, I'm so glad to be here, Lucy. I'm Norman Tran. I am the son of Chinese immigrants who very much had no idea what to do with a kid like me. Growing up as queer, neurodivergent, they're just like, oh my God, what is this demon child? I was always like very mischievous. And so for me, I never really felt like I belonged anywhere. Even in my career, I've dabbled in product design, I've dabbled in education. And so, most recently, my work has really been focused on building a online school for teaching EQ and soft skills called Relating Between the Lines. And that's just my desire to bring something that I think needs to exist in the world, which is I wish everyone knew how to communicate well.
Yeah.
Something my parents didn't know, how to model for me. So to fight for that and learn on my own, but like that's the gift I want to give to the world.
Yeah, I love that, Norman. And at what point did you realize? Because you went from, your history was in like educational design, and I was curious, at what point did you realize that like relationships actually, like, this is an area that is it's underserved, or there's something missing about existing solutions out there, and what motivated you to start relating between the lines for that reason?
I think that specific question of like why RBTL needs to exist in the world is like a 6 year long inquiry that began, or even longer, but like it began roughly in 2014
Yeah.
when I was just becoming a product designer. I happened to take an abridged version of Stanford's Touchy Feely class, and that opened my eyes to the world of interpersonal dynamics and realizing like wow, I'm actually like shit at this and I really need to learn this. And that was like a really big aha, like awakening moment for me.
Mhm.
If you fast forward several years, where like I later became a facilitator at Stanford for that class, and then later like porting that class to different places, I realized that like this material needs to be in the world in a way that doesn't quite yet exist. Because in
Mhm.
touchy feely, it's very experiential. That's hard to
Mhm.
remember and put into practice what you learned. It's kind of like everyone takes away something completely different. It's like a mosaic, right? It's very like undeterministic. And
Right.
I was very obsessed, having been a designer, like how do we design something that is replicable and like more guaranteed that someone will learn something? And how to make it fun? Because it's kind of deep
Yeah.
and can get really academic. I was like, I want to make it fun. I want to like make it colorful, like the I want to like queer eye this, basically. And so
Yeah.
that is the genesis of how this came to be. I was basically like realizing that out there, it's usually really academic stuff.
Mm.
Like you can read
Mhm.
papers and journals, which is great. It's good information and theoretical. You can go to therapy and coaching, which builds a lot of self awareness, but isn't really like skills oriented. You can go to
Mhm.
experiences like Burning Man, circling, authentic relating, but it's an experience. It's not a concrete takeaway. I wanted to fuse a little bit of all those things together. Like, how do you make it fun, practical,
Mhm.
experiential, communal? And that's why RBTL came to be.
Awesome. And Yeah, because I know in a traditional, like when you go get relationship help of some sort, it's either really academic, like you say, or really like it's a medical in some kind of like a therapy or medical setting, right?
Yeah.
And or you mentioned Burning Man, but those are just like snapshot events. It's like how do we actually build a skill?
Yes.
And I saw the page for RTBL. I mean, I saw it a long time ago, and it had this fun feeling that I have never seen before for this kind of for this kind of skill set. Yeah, and so you went to from the Stanford touchy feely class with David and Carol, who we had on the podcast earlier this year. You realized that that was an area that you really needed to work on, and then you noticed that this what you learned through that class didn't really exist for everybody else, basically, right? Uh,
Exactly. It's like it was locked behind the ivory tower of Stanford. And
mhm,
why is it that only MBAs who can afford six-figure tuition, why do they get to learn this super important life skill? What about everyone else who could learn that? So finding a way to
right.
bring it outside of Stanford's walls and unaffiliated with Stanford to create its own thing was really the goal.
Awesome. And I wanted to dig a little bit into how RBTL works first, and then I really want to dig, and then after that, I want to dig more into your journey throughout that because I know that you had a lot of ups and downs and have learned so much coming out of it, and that's really what this podcast is about: is really helping people figure out what they want and not just what they think they should be. But first, I'm just very curious. If you don't mind sharing, how does your program work? Like, how are you able to integrate the experiential components, but also give people like deliberate practice? I'm assuming that they need to be able to implement this in the real world.
Yeah. So people might be familiar with the term cohort-based course,
Mhm.
which is a term that really got popular in 2020 when the pandemic made everyone excited finally to learn online. So
Yeah.
Let Me Between the Lines was born in 2020. So it's a online cohort-based course. You're doing it with other people
Mhm.
across 6 weeks. So it's a pretty like intensive experience. And what we do is we sprinkle in a lot of different elements of learning design that I found effective, especially as like a neurodivergent person who's very, picky about learning. And so we have improv to make things experiential and fun and surprising. We
Huh.
have very practical tools that are like step by step. What do you even say? What do you avoid? So it's very specific and rigorous. And then
Mhm.
we have lots of practice, either in pairs with other students, or because we have different tiers in the program, there's also a group coaching version where you get
Mhm.
to practice with facilitators who are giving you real-time feedback and pointing out in real time, like, oh, the way you said that, I think you intended this, but actually had this impact. So through all of that, we get to have the best of all those different worlds, right? We get to have knowledge, we get to have practice, we have community, we have experience, and all of that I think is what creates such a powerful learning experience.
Awesome. Awesome, Norman. So, okay, let's talk more about your journey through, bootstrapping, relating between the lines, and then just kind of your journey. You founded this program, and you were the CEO, right, from the get go, and and then you and your co-founder, took it off basically, or took off with it, basically. And at this point, I think you've had multiple rounds of cohorts, and can you just can you just describe kind of what your journey has been from when you started up to this point? You can go into as little or as much detail as you want.
Yeah. So my co-founder Steph and I decided in 2020 to start RBTL almost
Hmm.
by accident. I was a
Uh,
former client of hers in her previous business, which basically taught like wellness coaching. So that's how I met her. and then she was leaving that venture. And then
Huh.
I, in 2020, left my previous role where I was running a design boot camp.
Mhm.
And so both of us happened to exit our previous roles at the same time and had this interest to do something together. And her past clients wanted something related to emotional intelligence. And I had been wanting to
Mm.
build something related to a kind of like touchy feely 2.0 for like
Yeah.
years. And so
Yeah.
she was like, why don't we just like try something? Like, let's just do one thing, just one class together for
Okay.
her old clients. And
Yeah.
so we did. That was like the first prototype essentially. And we loved it so much. It was like, oh my God, this is so cool. And then we went through like a 2 week mutual vetting process
Mm.
where I created a 10-page Notion doc that had tons of questions for basically co-founder vetting. And
Mm.
every time we sat down and answered the questions together, it became more of a yes, yeah, yeah. So it just kept getting more exciting, and like there was a lot of momentum. And so we're
Yeah.
like, okay, let's found this thing together. It made sense for me at the time to be CEO because I had created this IP,
Yeah.
and she was happy to basically take on like COO.
Mhm. So
And then
originally, the decision for you being so you guys founded this at the same time, and the decision for you to be CEO was because you owned the IP because you had the emotional intelligence, right? You
I
knew
was
the
the
content
teacher,
and knowledge.
basically.
Yeah,
She
yeah.
was the one who brought in the cohort. So from the beginning, it was kind of like she was the business person and I was the product person.
Yes, yes. Got it. Got it. That makes sense. Okay, yeah, keep going.
Yeah. And so about a year in, we're noticing that like I'm struggling with certain things.
Mhm.
Both her and I are learning constantly how to deal with my ADHD, which I got diagnosed in 2020. So it was rather fresh.
Mm.
Um, and so it was very challenging for both of us. But in the early days, we made it work. It
Mm.
wasn't that complex. It was just like the two of us and two facilitators that also came from her previous company who came to work here.
Yeah.
But around 2022 is when things got like extremely rocky because
Mhm.
things were getting complex. We were like 4 or 5 cohorts in. There's a lot more things to manage and think about, and things were just falling through the cracks on my end. So
Mhm.
specifically, what was falling through the cracks was basic CEO stuff, the admin
Mm.
things like franchise board tax and accounting and like legal and like all those things
Yeah.
that fall under the role of CEO, I was really struggling with. And the tipping point happened where there was this call where I had to tell her that like, oh, like I owe this much money for taxes because I forgot. I just
Mm.
forgot.
Yeah.
And that led to a really like shame inducing conversation, and
Mhm.
like I like broke down in tears because I basically told her like I can't do this anymore, like I'm just so bad at this part of the job that I feel like a failure. Like every day I'm just focusing on what I'm bad at, and
Mhm.
I'm spending less and less time on what I'm actually good at.
Yeah. And so in 2023, you had sent an email, so spoiler alert, that you were stepping down as CEO, and there is a happy ending to the story. You found a role that's better suited for you. But when you sent that email, the reason why I wanted you on this show is that I, in 2021, went through something extremely similar with my co-founder, and she was on your newsletter, and she forwarded me that the
Mm.
email that you wrote, and it brought me to tears because that prior end of 2021, we had one of the hardest discussions I've ever had with Richa, my co-founder. She was CEO, I was CTO at the time, and as a CTO, you're not just expected to hack things together and validate a proof of concept. There's a lot that goes into a technology technology director. I dropped the ball on so many things, and so I super related to the email that you sent, Norman. Do, if you don't mind, I'd like to ask, what were some of the like internal emotional resistance you had? Were there any beliefs that you had that you really had to shed in order to, make it through this conversation the way you did?
So many. Oh my god. Like if you felt emotional reading it, it's like imagine the private struggle, like a year in the making leading up to the point. Like
Yeah.
it's hard to be in that position where like what you thought was the thing you're gonna do ends up not being the right thing. So I think the hardest beliefs that I had to face were things like if I'm not the CEO, then I'm nothing. Like I don't know
Mm.
how that black and white thinking where that came from, but there's some very like identity like level struggles attached. I was just so like attached to this identity. I am the CEO. And that somehow like if I can't be the CEO, I failed. So
Mm.
that was one big idea I had to let go of. Because like if you think about it, like in hindsight, right? Like no one cares. Like everyone's just like, yeah, you do the thing that you like, and we
Yeah.
celebrate you for that. No one's like, oh, poor you, you're not the CEO. Like no one's doing that, and if they do that, I don't want to be around them.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it ended up being like a weird like no issue, right? From an objective point of view, but internally, I felt like my world had fallen apart. Another
Yeah.
thing was that like just because you originate the IP doesn't mean you want or have the capacity to run the company, right?
Yeah.
The IP is what allowed the company to start, but it is not what takes the company forward.
Hmm.
It's not. It's
Yeah.
necessary but insufficient.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. And this was a lesson that I had to learn too. Like, there's what makes the business help people, but then there's what gets the business money
Yeah,
and reach people. It's like you can't help people if you can't reach them.
yeah,
And that was I wanted to go back to what you said, Norman, about feeling like you had your identity tied to being the CEO.
mm,
And I mean, you said in hindsight, no one cares, right? I mean, if I think about how many CEOs are there in the world, right? It can't possibly be that everybody else is a failure, right?
yeah, exactly.
Yeah, but it's so weird though that like your logic and your feelings don't, like, sometimes they just don't sync up. And do you have a guess as to where you think, like, when did you start tying your value to being a CEO? Because that didn't happen right prior to relating between the lines, because you weren't one. So do you know at what point that happened? I'm very curious.
I think there's two layers that contributed to this happening.
Mm,
One layer is having ADHD, right? So there's always this chip on the shoulder of I know so much and I can't make use of my knowledge. I can't take action on my knowledge. So there's this like
mm,
bitterness in the world towards the world of like, I know more than XYZ person. How come I can't do XYZ, right? And so there's this
mm,
like deep
yeah,
wounding around wanting to prove that I can do something. So that's
yeah,
why there's like a lot of energy attached to the CEO. It's like, finally, it's my turn to build
mm,
something in the world. It's my chance. I can't fuck it up. It's kind of like that energy. So
yeah,
that's one big thread. The other one's more perhaps like intergenerational. On my mom's
yeah,
side, there's a my mom comes from a like lineage of rather successful business people that have gone through
yeah,
many generations of like failure and starting over and succeeding, failure, starting over and succeeding. Just like they always just ride the wave and come back strong.
yeah,
My mom in the lineage is the valley. She has struggled in every venture she's ever started. and she doesn't know, but I think she has ADHD. It's like hereditary, so that
Yeah.
would explain a
Yeah.
lot. But like she has always struggled, and so I always had this like idea as like since I was young that like I need to break this quote unquote familial curse.
Mhm.
This failure ends
Yeah.
here. I will
Yeah.
break the chains, and it's like lo and behold, like I didn't. um,
Yeah.
and I've had to do a lot of work and healing both during that the writing of that piece and after about like what does it mean to even carry this idea of a curse? Is there such a thing? Is this just a
Mm.
emotional kind
Mm.
of your parents' unlived dreams lived through you kind of thing, or is it like no one cares also and like chill out, you know? And I'm
Yeah.
kind of trying to lean more into that now that like there's no curse, no one cares, no one's like holding you against this measuring stick. All people want, the people that matter, is your happiness and your
Mhm.
fulfillment. And so I remember having a conversation with my sister where I was like crying because she said something really beautiful. She's like, Norman, like there's like why do you think you need to get it right on the first time? Like forget about mommy for a second. Like just
Yeah.
just like slow down and like you have a long life ahead of you. So
Yeah.
like something like that really moved me to realize that like wow, I'm now part of that club of people that tried really hard and it didn't work out the first time, but it doesn't mean that I'm doomed. There's no
Yeah.
death sentence here.
Yeah. 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 Sounded like there was a lot of looking at how other people think and making assumptions about what other people think, which is really coming from a place of like our own insecurity.
Absolutely.
And that just, I wonder if it just kept getting bigger and bigger, like, it just kept getting more and more because we keep having this internal assumption kind of feeding into itself. Yeah.
It's all
And later,
projection.
it's what?
It's all projection. It's all I don't want to feel
Yeah.
my insecurity. I like push it out into the world and assume everyone is thinking that of me.
Yeah.
And it's like
I
if
have
I
it
just
too.
back, it's like, oh,
Yeah. I'm so glad that you're aware of it though. I think most people never even become aware of it. And it is very, it is very, it upsets me sometimes to watch people I care about kind of ruminate like that and end up going down paths that aren't suited for them. And I was one of them too. And occasionally I still fall back into that. Yeah. But I think just even having awareness is a really good step in helping you break out of it. Did you feel like when you wrote out your whole journey in that email, did you feel like that helped to just kind of clarify things for you?
it felt simultaneously liberating and expectedly terrifying. Right? It is the most
Mhm.
vulnerable disclosure to say
Yeah.
I am not fit for the thing I thought I was supposed to be doing, right?
Yeah.
And weirdly enough, there's nothing but support and love from the readers, like friends and past students were like, "Oh my god, so happy for you that you are like both moving into what feels better." I was like,
Yeah.
"Why are you so generous? Why are you so compassionate?" It was like, weird because I was just expecting them to hit us with
Yeah.
and it was just all like love and support.
I love that. I so we talked about the internal resistance. Did you have you this is a great segue. You mentioned that you got a lot of external support. Were there any external forms of resistance as well from family or friends to you making the switch?
I think my friends were protective of me,
Mm,
as in they didn't want me to do something that was an act of like fear,
mhm,
right? They wanted me to make a conscious decision that was in my best interest. Um, my parents were very protective, and so it got weird where like I'm really good friends with Steph both then and now, and so there came a point where like my parents would be really like kind of critical and harsh towards Stephanie and be like, no.
Mhm.
I would like correct them, be like, just because this shit show is going down doesn't mean you get to like make more assumptions about her. Like both of us are doing our
Mhm.
best. So they
Yeah.
would like create very negative stories like, oh, she's doing a power grab, she's trying to take over your company. I'm like, I see where you're coming from because that's happened in my mom's lineage, right? But like
Yeah.
I'm like, that's not what's happening here. Like this is both of us figuring out a puzzle, but stepping away from how we think we should be doing things. Right? The
Mhm.
should is what got us here in the first place. I should be CEO. She should be this. And versus like
Yeah.
what actually makes sense is she could be CEO and I could be something else. Like
Yeah.
so the external resistance was more like people wanting to protect us, but just doing it in less helpful ways.
Yeah, I I totally get what you mean. I love that you framed it as that they were just trying to protect. They were just trying to protect your happiness. Again, it's all about people caring about your happiness, and that's true. I think that's true. And yeah, I felt I had a very similar situation when I was trying to talk. It was so hard talking about it with my family, to be honest, because like you said, they painted a very I didn't want to say it was negative. Like they know Richa is great. It's just that it was a very they started making assumptions, right? And about her intentions. And they really did not want me, exactly your words, want me to make a choice out of fear or out of like lack of faith in myself kind of thing.
Mhm, mhm, mhm.
And but really for me it was coming from a place of actually it's interesting, Norman. Let me know if this is if you resonate with this. I think I felt that it was the more fearful move was to stay in my role because that it's the fear of not letting go of status.
Yes, very
Yeah.
much resonate with that. I had gotten used to the strange comfort that comes from telling people that you're a CEO.
Oh
You know, like,
man.
CEO,
Yeah.
like it wasn't like that, but like there's a slight like, oh, I feel good about myself when I say
Yes.
that, right? And like I had gotten used to that,
Yeah.
and to be like, no, like we don't. We're there's something more important here
Yeah.
than your ego and your 5 seconds of egoic validation, right? It's like that stepping away from that took a little bit of work. But I
Yeah.
think the biggest fear actually was a cousin to what you experienced. There's a sense of like, oh God, I have to like let go of status. But the
Mhm.
bigger scary thing was, but this is all we've known for
Mm.
two plus years. What on earth is
Yeah.
going to happen now? That's even scarier.
Mm.
That's stepping into like true unknown territory.
Yeah.
Like we're living in dysfunction right now, but to like step out of that and do something completely different, that's even more terrifying because we're at least certain that this doesn't work.
Yeah. And your wake up call, sorry, I think you mentioned this, but I wanted to know like the signs were, I think you mentioned the signs were there, right, already in 2020, 2021. But really in 2022 is when it was the money, right? Like you guys lost some money and that was kind of the wake up call. Is that what it was? Because I know a lot of people, they don't realize that something needs to change until like there's big enough consequences. Was that what it was for you?
Yeah, it was basically like forgetting to do the taxes,
Hmm.
in which case there was quite a lot of money
Yeah.
to deal with as a consequence, and
Yeah.
that was enough to be like, this hurts so much for both of us that
Yeah.
we need to completely rethink
Yeah.
our
I,
situation.
I really hope a lot of people don't have to go hit like so rock bottom in order to kind of like learn these lessons. So hope I hope people who can hear your story will it will prevent them right from going down that path too soon. Let's now shift gears to the upswing of things. How did you and Steph okay, I hear way more stories of co-founders breaking up and just like falling out. Of course, I think some of that is like people tend to sensationalize those stories more, right? The amicable disputes don't really get talked about. Yours was actually one of two disputes I've ever read that was good. So I want you to share, as much as you're willing to share, how were you guys able to decide what was fair and what made you both happy?
I think first, what had to happen was there's like two things.
Mhm.
One is I had to acknowledge the pain that I unintentionally put Steph through as a result of the lack of awareness, the
Mhm.
lack of courage to make the new decision.
Mhm.
Like the cost of keeping things the same for about 2 years is what we had to first process. The fact that she was really being CEO on
Mhm.
top of her role in order to keep the company going
Yeah.
when I was experiencing tremendous executive dysfunction. It was kind of like acknowledging the emotional labor, acknowledging the traumatic work experience of being so overworked to the point where she lost hearing in 1 year.
Wow. Yeah.
So it's kind of like, oh my God, we got to deal first with what has happened and what's the cost, what is the sacrifice that's been made so far. So there was a lot of like acknowledging and being with pain and kind of like just creating space for that without doing anything. It was just
Mhm.
kind of like acknowledge, acknowledge, acknowledge. That part is really hard, and usually people like don't want to deal with that or don't know have the capacity to do that. But we stayed in it through that
Mhm.
process. Another important thing was reiteration of commitment. We were both still very much committed to this larger mission and like vision for the world. Like
Mhm.
this is bigger than both of us. This is bigger than both of our immediate struggle to figure out what our supposed role should be.
Yeah.
So I think it helps to know that like this is bigger than both of us. It's not just you versus me.
Yes.
It's
It's
how do we get through this together? And that kind of
yeah.
collaborative dialogue is what ultimately allowed us to move from being with and processing this grief and pain and heaviness to becoming open to new solutions, being open to trying things differently.
Yeah. So it was not me versus you, it was us versus the problem
It
of
was you
right.
versus me for a little bit when she was being with the reality.
Mm,
I think
mm,
there was a tipping point where she asked, like,
mm,
what was the question she asked? I don't remember the exact question she asked, but it was something along the lines of like, "Would you take on these responsibilities?" And I said,
mm,
"I oh no, no. I think
right.
the question was, would you be able to support me in and like, insert various responsibilities related to kind of like the CEO role?"
Mhm,
And I was like, "No,
mhm,
I can't.
mhm.
It's not that I don't want to. I just can't."
Can't,
And that was
yeah.
the first like true admitting and facing reality 100%. It's
Mm,
I can't do it. It's not that I don't want to. I literally can't. And she had to first be with her anger.
yeah.
How long did you know? Why would you do this to me? I
Mm,
can't believe you put me through this. Do I even deserve this? I deserve more. Like all these kind of things she had
yeah,
to process. And I was just kind of like holding her anger and not solving it, just being with it and just letting her be angry at me because she deserves to experience her own process
yeah,
until she's ready to come to me with like, okay, I processed my anger. I'm not taking it personally. You're not doing this to harm me. I see like the, the pure intention of wanting to do what's best for both of us. It's just that there's this terrible constraint of ADHD and not enough resources in the company to like
yeah.
hire out all these different people to like do flesh it all out. And
Right.
so that was the, I think, big turning point in the process
Yeah.
of kind of repairing this gigantic rupture that happened as a result of deciding that I could no longer take on the CEO responsibilities,
Mhm.
and her feeling just, the devastation of like, you mean I have to carry all of this? And then later us renegotiating who does what, who's fit for what. Yeah.
Yeah. It sounded like you guys were practicing what you were teaching in the course.
Yeah.
I've not taken your course, but I read the book that the touchy feely class was based on, and oh my god, this it sounds like you guys had to pull in all the tools
Oh yeah.
from the course to manage this conversation. Oh my god.
It's really funny because like we have an advanced course that's
Yeah.
focused on conflict management called Untriggered. And in the
Oh,
class, we literally take these
this
conversations we had and
yeah.
use them as examples. Like, this is how we work through this. This is how we
That's
talk through this. Because it's real. Like, we
yeah.
didn't make this up. Like, we're walking the talk and showing you like what it's like to be in the trenches.
Awesome. What an excellent case study that you can use as an example for your own course. I mean, that came out of this. That's that's one good thing. That's like, one of the good things that came out of this conversation. It seems I am by the way, Norma, I just want to say that I am noticing one thing that you have amazing empathy is what I am just noticing just from our conversation. Every question that I asked you that involved other people, like your friends, your parents, or Steph, you always started from seeing their perspective first. That's that you always started with, well, here's where they were standing, da da da. And then you went into talking about how you guys dealt with it. And I very rarely do I don't very rarely do I meet somebody who does that, right? And I just want to say you do you definitely like walk the talk, as they say, when it comes to emotional intelligence. Yeah, so I just wanted to say I'm very impressed with that.
Thank you. I'm
Yeah.
glad. It's taken a long time to get
Mm,
here. This is not intuitive, right? Like I said, when I took
mm,
touchy feely, it was like, wow, you're so unempathetic. You don't see half of what's going on. Like, oh my god. So I think it's
huh.
taken years to get to this point. It's like a very dedicated, honed skill that's been very painful to develop. But
I'm glad you guys have this course to help others get,
yeah,
develop these skills because
but like
this
your
is
world
yeah.
just changes once you see it that way. Like we actually teach it in our class. We teach everyone how
Mm,
to. I'll do like a quick TLDR. Like
mhm.
all behaviors that we find irritating in other people
Uh-huh.
can just be summed as there's a thorn in their hand. And if you can learn to
Mhm.
see the thorns in people's hands when they're being annoying and
Mm,
irritating, then you stop taking it so personally and you have more space to, one, be human, and then two, come up with collaborative solutions, right? Because if you're like, oh, you're just doing that to XYZ me, like you're
yeah.
not gonna get anywhere. But you're like, oh, you are really lacking some security in your life, and
Mhm.
there's a way that you're speaking to me that I'm not personally liking, but I can understand what's happening. Let's deal with this in an effective way. Like no one does that, but like once you learn how to operate in that world, like the world just frees up a lot more,
Yeah.
and it's less fraught with like landmines. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's a very, very good visual. I love the thorn analogy. So it has been, a couple of months now. I don't know when you guys renegotiated your roles. My understanding is she is CEO now, and you are the CPO. Is that correct? The
Yeah,
product person.
basically.
Yeah. And it's been a few months. How are things going now between you two and with the business?
So we're at a very interesting transition right now
Mm.
where we are deciding that we are going to basically run one final cohort in
Oh.
October,
Uh huh.
and then we're going to allow RBTL to grow at its own pace
Mhm.
without the like frantic pressure of needing it to be the sole source of income right now for the two of us.
Got it.
So we're trying to take a longer term vision and approach to running the company. So basically it will no longer be our full-time jobs is the
Right.
big transition that we are both entering, where we are realizing that this is necessary in the world. It's changed people's lives, but it is not yet a hugely profitable business for
Mhm.
the two of us who put so much effort into running these experiences. And so there's a lot of grief to that, right? Because we were like, oh,
Mhm.
we're doing this like forever. And now it's like, oh, wow, there's an even larger game plan now. The new game plan is we will both
Yeah.
take on jobs and slowly save up money to bootstrap like a reincarnation of RBTL
Mm.
that would allow us to enter a new phase of developing the company that's a more spacious manner. The last
Yeah.
3 years have been hell,
Yeah.
hell, and our
Oh, yeah.
students. They love the experience, but they're like, we think you guys are like falling apart, and we
Mhm.
are worried about you. Like they see how much love we have for them, and like
Yeah.
the lack of love we have for ourselves, like in how little we are tending to our needs.
Yeah.
So it was very much like a labor of love for several years. And the reality is like something like this, it's just going to take more time.
Mhm.
And we now have the distance from being in it full time every single day to think bigger. What else is possible? Where could we make changes? What wants to be created in the world that is no longer about online learning? Because that wave
Yeah.
came in 2020 and really started to leave in 2022.
Mhm.
So we are in a new phase where something else needs to exist, and we don't know what that looks like yet. But we're kind of in
Mm.
this hibernation
Yeah.
phase
I
where,
it so
yeah,
Mhm. Sorry. It sounds like you mentioned hibernation. I think that's a great word. Yeah. It sounds like you guys needed space to step back and think. And
yeah,
because I am projecting my experience onto you guys, because definitely the first 3 years it was like in the trenches, and I did not have time to think because I
yeah,
was doing the entire time
yeah.
and doing a poor job too because I wasn't in the right role. But
Yeah.
but yeah, totally.
There's the feeling that the train must keep going, the show must go on, and like when
Yes.
that happens, you have no space to be creative. You have no
Hmm.
space to think like what would be best for
Yeah.
us as
Do you
humans.
And I love that you're thank you so much for being so honest and transparent here, Norman. I really like that you guys are basically, as business owners, as a team, basically again having a conversation of, is this actually the right mix of, delivering value, our strengths, and
What the market needs.
actually what's the other do you know that ikigai thing where there's like three circles in the Venn diagram? It's like
Yeah, there's like
it's
what
your
the world needs.
what the
There's
world
like what
needs
you're good at,
and then what you
what
enjoy
you're
doing.
passionate doing,
Yep,
and then what
that's it.
is financially.
Yeah, viable. And I think that it sounds like you guys are stepping back and reevaluating that rather than tying your identities to RBTL,
And
right?
income, right? Like we were tying
And
both
income.
our identity and income to this
All the income. Yeah, all
project.
the eggs in one
We're
basket.
realizing like, wow,
Yeah.
life is more than having a purposeful career. Life is
Mhm.
actually more than that, right? And so both of
Mhm.
us were realizing how neglected we were as people. I
Yeah.
had been neglecting my personal interests and friendships, and same for her. It's like we want to do other things. We want to work out and have a trainer and enjoy live music and just like human things,
Yeah.
right? Just like
Human.
fun and stuff. We couldn't do any of that stuff for 3 years.
Yeah, yeah.
Easy. And so we're like, we need to take care of us we have built something that took care of a lot of people,
Right.
and that will always be true. But we need to take care of ourselves. We need to live a little bit our own lives. And in
Yeah.
the meantime, as we figure out, our next individual roles,
Hmm.
there's still ways for us to continue contributing towards this larger mission of RBTL.
Yeah, because I do believe in your larger mission of helping the world connect more deeply. And it may not be like relating between the lines, it may not be the right vehicle, or it may be, but it just needs some tweaking that you guys do not have resources or energy for right now, but no one's in a race, right, with you guys right
Exactly,
now.
exactly.
So
That's
you
what we
can slow
realized.
down.
Like, there's no race, there's no rush.
Yeah.
Uh, we're trying to exit the capitalistic hamster wheel
Hmm.
and realize that like there is a way to do this that doesn't drive us insane,
Yeah.
and feel very fun and also be nourishing financially and emotionally and in a meaning purpose level.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I wish you two all the best on doing that. Um, with me and Richa, I mean, one of the biggest decision making factor was I chose to have children. I want children, and I have a baby now. But I had to make a choice. I cannot work 60, 70
That's a
hours a
full-time
week.
job.
Not with not with a baby. And I was like, I have to cut the amount of attention I give this and the amount of hours, right, I give this. And that does mean accepting less compensation, right? And a lower job title, right? I mean, lower. There's such, see, when I said that, my heart clenched because there's something about saying the word lower that
Yeah.
still triggers the status seeking side of me. But I mean, it is what it is. It's just a lower paid job title, right? But then that's kind of the trade off we have to make because it's, and I think this is what you're saying. It's like money is not cannot be everything because that like there's other parts of your life and what at the end of the day we all want to be happy, right? It's money is just one vehicle to get us there, but there's several vehicles of happiness.
And vice versa, right? Like for us, we were trading away money for meaning. And we
For
had
meaning.
all the purpose in the world, but like you can't live off meaning.
Yeah, yeah.
We needed more money, and that's just the reality.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it's okay to not make RBTL the sole source. Like that's why nonprofits exist. I'm not saying that we're going to turn into a nonprofit, but like
Yeah.
that's why like alternative org
Yeah.
structures and
Yeah.
programs exist. And so there's a lot of
There's
time we're
still.
giving ourselves to reinvent and
Mhm.
explore.
Yeah. And I believe you can have meaning and also have a like quality of life. So I'm rooting for you guys to figure out what that
Thank
looks
you.
like for you.
Thank you.
All right. I just want to end with some other questions for you. So I didn't prep you for this one, but I really wanted to ask about the neurodivergence, your ADHD. How do you feel like that has impacted you? You kind of already touched on this in that like it made you feel like this constant sense of like not enoughness, having to prove yourself. Did you feel like it helped you in any ways as well through your journey? I'm just curious because I know a lot of people have ADHD, right? And feel stuck at one point or another in their lives. Or maybe if it hasn't helped you, like some ways in which you kind of, got around it. Just, yeah. Top of your head. Yeah.
So the more technical language for what I am is I'm 2E, which means twice exceptional, and I hate these words because they're like loaded with nonsensical
Okay.
association. But
Yeah.
to be 2E means you have both giftedness and some kind of disability.
Hmm.
So I have giftedness and ADHD.
Okay.
ADHD is pretty well understood at this point.
Hmm.
Giftedness is extremely misunderstood. That term does not imply I'm better than it just means like I have like apparently high IQ,
Hmm.
but in conjunction with ADHD, it creates very confusing symptoms where like the giftedness can mask some of my ADHD symptoms. So comparing me to
Um,
another non-gifted ADHD person, it may appear that I don't have ADHD at times. And then for someone who has like who's like 2E like me, the symptoms interact in very like bizarre ways.
huh.
So, for example, what's very common in ADHD is, at least for people with like inattentiveness, because there's like different variants: inattentive, hyperactive, or combined. I have both a little
Mm,
bit.
mm, mhm.
Inattentive means like it's hard to focus. It's easy to get distracted. I
Yeah,
can't follow a conversation.
that's the
It's a
normally
very
understood.
common,
Yeah.
yeah, it's a
Yeah.
very common presentation of ADHD. But like I don't have trouble with following a conversation. Like I lead conversations, I help synthesize conversations, and that's because the giftedness comes in and helps me there. Giftedness
Yeah.
helps me just zone in on the thing with extreme precision, with no effort. And it's like,
Mm.
thank God I
Mm.
have that, because like I'd be like lost in conversations all the time. So that's a funny like intersection where like I can focus very well in
Yeah.
conversations. I just can't really focus in work
Yeah.
because the doing of tasks, that's hard. But I think ADHD affords me a lot of possibility thinking. I'm able to see a lot of possible outcomes in any given scenario, and that's like amplified by the giftedness. But I think that's very common for ADHD folks to be creative, right? So like
Yeah.
tell me to make something and I'll come up with like 15 different things like in a very short amount of time. And like a person who doesn't have ADHD would struggle with that. I think another really interesting thing about ADHD that people don't think about is you have higher standards for what's fun and
Oh,
engaging.
that's so interesting. Yeah.
And you need
Yeah.
to own that, right? Because like I own that in my teaching. I'm like, this is how people teach. This is how I teach because I have ADHD, and it's gonna be fun. It's gonna feel like a game. It's gonna feel like a magic show, and you're in for a ride, right? Like, because if it's boring to me, it's a little bit boring to you. But
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
it needs to be really good for me to like be engaged, right? So I just like hold a very high standard for what's
Mm.
fun and interesting, and that
Yeah.
bleeds through my work. And I think ADHD people have that. They're easily distracted, but the things that hold their attention,
Yeah.
they have the ability to create things that do that too, that hold people's attention, that are sticky and magnetic. That's a superpower I think that like ADHD people have. Ultimately, what I did do in ADHD is I had a coach who had me look at like the downsides of ADHD in my symptoms and then
Mhm.
the plus sides of those symptoms, and then kind of like integrate the two. Like, what's a phrase I can use that feels good for me that I can
Yeah.
talk to employers about? Because that was my
Yes.
big fear after retail. Oh my God, am I employable?
Yeah.
And so things like knowing that I'm a good firefighter, right? When things are going haywire, I'll like quickly figure out, like jump in and figure things out. I like am able to like dive into messiness and create structure.
Mhm.
That's also kind of like the gifted part that like loves creating matrices of frameworks and things like that. But like
Yeah.
we're comfortable in the messiness because we're very messy. So like being able to say
Yeah.
things like I'm these things without saying I'm bad, without saying I'm better,
Yeah.
just this is what it is, helps me engage in the job process, the job search process, in a way that's a much more dignifying, because it can feel very crappy
Yeah.
as a neurodivergent person to feel like I can't do that, I suck at this,
Yeah.
I'm not classically employable with the traditional I'm a good planner and I'm very good at organizing. Like, no, I'm not any of those things, but I have these other things that
Yeah.
I'm good at, and I have to sell those things.
Yeah. And you're really pointing out like I love that you're able to find like I don't know if this is a Pollyanna belief, but I do believe that there is a role for everybody. Even if you're not classic, like you don't score high on the classically employable traits. And you just gave some really great examples there. Thank you so much for sharing that. my last question, Norman, is off the top of your head for other people who are struggling with a role, do you know how maybe they can tell if it's just that the role's not right for them or it's just something they need to like, practice more on?
That is such a good question. I think this is like why I've always found the whole Carol Dweck fixed versus growth mindset like contentious to me as a neurodivergent person, is because we have
Yeah.
to both consider that which is malleable, right? What can we do that actually can change over time, like skills, like developing new skills, and then
Mhm.
what are like ceilings, right? Like
Mhm.
ceilings exist. The whole growth mindset implies that there's limitless growth. No, there's not. If you're neurodivergent, there's certain things that you literally cap off. Like there's an asymptote, honey. You're
Yeah.
not getting any higher.
Yeah.
So you have to realize like you have asymptotes if you're neurodivergent. My asymptotes exist in the realm of like executive functioning. There's only so much I can do related to planning, starting tasks, remembering things, setting appointments.
Yeah.
And so knowing your symptoms and mapping it to like what's worth investing in, what is giving you diminishing returns, I think that equation is really important, right? So because like in my role in deciding like does it make sense to stay CEO or not, there is huge diminishing returns to me spending even a second of my time thinking about accounting, thinking
Mhm.
about finance, thinking about
Mhm.
legal. It was just the worst use of Norman's time, period.
Yeah. Yeah.
And to admit that is freeing to be like, oh, like I'm just not fit for this role. And it
Yeah.
doesn't matter how much time I put into this, it's just not gonna happen.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
kind of like it's kind of like wanting to be good at writing with your non-dominant hand.
Yeah. Oh, that's a great
What's the
that's a
point?
great
What's the
analogy.
point? What's the point of being able to write cursive backwards with your left hand if you're right-handed?
Yeah.
No one cares. So it's
Yeah.
kind of like, why would you want to put yourself through these hoops if it's never going to work out?
Right.
So if you have enough of these kind of diminishing return areas in your role, it is very likely you're in the wrong role.
Right.
And it doesn't matter if you get support. It doesn't matter if you have a good manager. It doesn't even matter if you're in a like neurodivergent friendly team. You will struggle and struggle and struggle and struggle for
Mhm.
no reason,
Yeah.
for no good reason.
Yeah.
So at that point, I would consider like what areas have ease and are
Mhm.
like readily accessible and fruitful for you.
Right. This is this is very great. Thank you so much. Yeah, for me, strategic thinking at the business level is something that I I'm just it's not something that I'm good at, and I don't even know if I can get better at it. Like I probably with a lot of deliberate practice, but if do I want to spend the next 30, 40 years of my life trying to get better at this, right? Which is where you say diminishing returns, right? Like I I that's not where I am, which is why I'm not for me, I stepped down from a C-level position, right? Because I'm like, you have to be a business level, strategical thinker, like visionary. And it's really funny. I took Strengths Finder recently. I don't know if you heard about that.
Oh,
And
yeah.
strategic thinking was bottom my I think it was my lowest scoring or the second lowest scoring one. And I was like, wow, okay.
Out of 5 or 30.
Out of the 30 something that they have. It was the bottom two, and I'm like, okay,
Like,
I should stop betting on this horse. This is probably never gonna happen. Yeah, and I was just, yeah, and I have the same. You're the first person I've spoken to who doesn't love mindset that the Carol Dweck's book because I felt like I had contingents with that book as well. I think they have a certain target audience that really, really needs to hear that. But I don't think I was that target audience. And so I think trying to grit my way through everything actually worked against
yeah,
me. Oh, that's the
yeah,
other
we're
book,
getting
Grit.
gaslit. We are getting gaslit. They're saying you just don't have enough grit. You didn't
Yeah.
work hard enough. Your mindset's not good. Like, shut up.
Yeah. So Grit was the other book, yeah, that I read, and it did speak to me, but I didn't need that book. It's funny. There's actually another book called Quit by Annie Duke. I don't know if you've ever heard about that one. And I saw my mother in law read it once, and I haven't read it myself yet, but I skimmed through it, and it basically is about like when to quit, right? Like when to bet. Know that you bet on the wrong horse, and you should bet on something else. And I was like, oh my god, I feel like people need to read Grit and Quit next to each other
Yeah,
so that you have a balanced perspective.
yeah. I
Yeah.
think as I am, in my 30s now and
Mhm.
don't have the same youthful, endless vigor I did as, a bright-eyed 20 something interested in entrepreneurship, I'm now less and less interested in working hard and
Mhm.
more about creating like ease in my life
Mhm.
and flow, right? It's like leaning
Yeah,
less
yeah.
into I gotta prove myself and being a freaking high performing. What it's like,
Yeah.
I'm really good
Mhm.
at certain things that I do, and I'm terrible at a lot of things. But when I focus on the things I'm really good at, like
Yeah.
it's insane. I do what five people can't even do in like 10
That's
minutes. You
that
know what I
is
mean?
the
So it's like
perspective. Yeah.
I'm not wasting my time proving anything and working
Mhm.
harder than I need to work. I'm more interested in doing what makes sense for
Yeah.
me in my particular brain. And I hope more
Yeah.
people recognize the proving energy that they might be trapped in and realize
Yeah.
that like, there's a world that exists outside of proving where you're stepping more into what's pleasurable. That's like literally a mindset we teach in RBTL. It's like
Love it.
stop trying to prove things, step into what's pleasurable, and like so much more is, I think, accessible from that shift.
Completely agree. Completely agree. Thank you, Norman, so much for coming on. There's been so much like nuggets that you dropped, and so many things that I don't think other people would be courageous enough, I guess, to say. So I really thank you for being very raw here. Where can our audience find you?
Yeah. So you can find me on Twitter. It's at Norman underscore Tran. My
Mhm.
website is normantran.com. You can see what I do there.
Yeah,
And if any of you are interested in the last cohort of Related Between the Lines,
yeah,
relatingbetweenthelines.com, you can sign up for a newsletter there and just get a sense of,
yeah.
what this work is about. We are doing our last uh, celebratory farewell cohort starting mid October,
Mid October.
which is very
Okay.
exciting.
Okay.
Yeah, if anyone's really just wanting to learn how to communicate in a way that feels more connecting in your relationships, we're all about that.
Excellent. Thank you, Norman. Have a good rest of the day.
Thank you, Lucy. It was fun.